Welcome to Bringing Jesus Back into Focus. I'm Christopher John Joseph. I was born into the Jewish Christian Catholic Church in 1957. I left when I was 16 or 17 and went across to study Buddha's teachings because they were saying there's only one God in this book called the Bible. And of course I thought, why have they got the Old Testament in our church? That's the Jewish religion. And they were saying, oh, that's Yahweh, that's the God of Jesus there. And I said, what, who went down to Jericho and slaughtered every man, woman and little child and stole the gold and silver and brass from the temple, burnt the place to the ground and stole the land from them? What, Yahweh told them to do that, and that's the God of Jesus? Yes, that's right. I said, bye. Come on, Jesus. Something's not right here. Something's a bit smelly here. But they've got Christian charities. You see, that's the trouble. They've mixed the new wine in with the old wine. So they've got Jesus and love in there, and they've got old Yahweh, the war god, in there. The Jewish religion is a two-headed God, Yahweh. One body, Yahweh, true. Monotheistic body, true. Two heads, opposing forces. Same as the Romans war god Mars and the god of peace, Pax, and the Greeks, Ares and Irene, and the Egyptians, Sekhmet was their war god. So the Jews had a violent, brutal, murdering, thieving, lying war god, genocidal, the same as Mars, Ares, Sekhmet. They called their war god Yahweh. But we have to say Yahweh won because the Jews were dishonest, you see, deceiving. The Romans, the Greeks and Egyptians were very honest. When they wanted to have a peaceful, loving relationship, they went to a different temple than Mars or Ares or Sekhmet. They went to another temple with another god in it, a god of love and peace. And they prayed to that god to help them have the love to make friends with their neighbours here, this country here, whatever. So they had to go to another god to do that because that's the power of love. When they wanted to go and kill and murder them all, like the Jews did at Jericho and elsewhere, and the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians, they all did it. They'd go to their war god and pray, make us strong so we can kill them. And of course they're always the enemy, but they just invade and steal their land. Let's call them an enemy. So sometimes others would attack them, then they're the enemy and they defend themselves. It doesn't matter, they're all satanic. So they're all worshipping a war god, and all war gods are satanic. So the Jews had another god of love, just like the Romans, the Greeks and the Egyptians and others. They did have another god, a completely different god. This god tells them, if you're all together living in a community, Jewish children of mine, says Yahweh, then love one another as yourself. Don't argue and bicker and quarrel amongst yourselves, Jewish children. And then Yahweh goes even further in Leviticus and goes, now if a foreigner is living amongst you, my Jewish children, treat them as if they are Jewish and love them as yourself. Now that would be the equivalent today of saying, if a Palestinian is living amongst you, my Jewish children, treat them as a Jew and love them as yourself. So you can see the God of love is in their religion, but they don't all follow it. 80% don't. So we've got a big problem. Well, they've got a big problem, of course, the evil they're committing over there in the West Bank and stealing land, murdering people in Gaza. But look, that's their satanic problem. They worship a war god and a god of love. But they call this loving God Yahweh. Very cunning. Let's call our loving God Yahweh and our still stinking, filthy, war murdering God Yahweh. That way our God loves us and love one another. And we can go and kill and murder and steal because it's the same loving God who loves us when we go and we love to kill and steal because our God is a loving God. It's a schizophrenic religion at best. It's dualistic, that's for sure. I wish the Jews would fix it up, but they're not interested. I wish there were some Jewish branches that ripped out all the references to their stinking war god out of their Old Testament or Torah or whatever. Rip them all out and burn them. I want to see some Jewish rabbis rebel and start a really totally different, just have a dialogue in your scriptures and rip out all references to the war god that you worship. Just rip them all out. Jesus did. Why do you think he was different? So he was a Jew who cut the head off, the war god off the body of Yahweh and left the God of love on there. So he knew they were worshipping two gods. So this is the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, which I've had to put out around the world for, well, it's for anybody, but if you want to know about Jesus more correctly, these are the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged from the Jewish religion and the Jewish poison and the Jewish overlays about the apocalypse. I'll just read the introduction. Jesus taught we can all experience an inner spiritual awakening if we search for it. He called this the treasure hidden in the field of earth or flesh, This is our eternal spiritual identity, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving spiritual creator. Our bodies of flesh are only temporary and empowered by earthly things, and all flesh dies. Only our spiritual body and soul mind of love lives on to come into the presence of our loving creator, to reap as we have sown. His teachings and spiritual way of love and non-violence can help awaken us all into a new spiritual life here on earth, leading us to the heavenly spiritual world of love after death. Jesus taught we all have two different bodies with us in one, and he said that the spiritual body, being eternal, is the most important to be healthy and well in spirit. He provides us with the spiritual instructions to follow and become at one with, to be awakened and transformed into spiritual children of light of our loving spiritual creator in heaven. You can read the rest yourself, but essentially I just say I remove all the Jewish overlays and distortions. They're the contents of the book. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the Gospels are there. Matthew combines any repeated sayings in Mark and Luke. Both Matthew and Luke copied the Gospel of Mark, so nearly all of Mark is in Matthew and nearly all of Mark is in Luke. So I've just combined, if there's two or three of the same sayings with slight variations, I just bring all the variations together in the one account in Matthew. And then any ones that are not in Matthew but still in Mark, I have them there. Any ones in Luke that are not in Matthew, I have them there. And also I've taken out some certain focused sayings of Jesus. For example, his words save us. Now he says that 17 times throughout the Gospels in different ways. And in order for that to be more powerful, because I've met these Jewish Christians who say, oh, it's only his blood saves you. If you don't believe his blood on the cross saves you, you won't be saved. I said, he said 17 times it's his words that save you, not his blood. That's a different matter. His body of flesh died and went back to the earth. He left in a perfect, beautiful spiritual body. That's what the death on the cross was about, the two bodies, the caterpillar and the butterfly. But they say, oh, no, his body of flesh rose up, his body of dead flesh. I say, he never taught that. Haven't you read the Gospels? So that's the contents anyway. And so we'll get on now with the Matthew, I think this is part 6 or 7, I can't remember, maybe 7. Jesus rejected at Nazareth. Matthew 13:53-58. Jesus came to his own country and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue. And many that heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get all of this wisdom? And how does he perform mighty works by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they took offence at him, teaching like this. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honour except in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house. And he could do no mighty works there, except laying his hands on a few sick people to heal them, because they had no respect or belief in him. So there's that problem of he was just an ordinary Jewish child working with his dad. He wasn't a trained rabbi or anything like that, but he underwent a spiritual awakening. We don't know exactly where he travelled or who he heard, but by the time he was 30 he'd really gone through a massive spiritual awakening. Enlightenment is what it's called. Buddha underwent the same thing. And once they became enlightened, Jesus and Buddha, they started teaching. And Jesus, they go, you're just a carpenter's son. How can you know all this? Well, he was enlightened. His spiritual mind became fully alive. And that was his primary identity. His flesh became secondary. So that's how he knew so much about spiritual things, because he became spiritually awakened. And he said, and you must wake up too. Raise those dead to the spirit back to life. That's what he said. Thomas 31, Jesus said, a prophet is not popular in his hometown. A doctor does not heal family and friends. That's part of the problem when you are in a family or a given situation, a social structure. If you change and become incredibly spiritual and start talking about these things, people are just going to think, what? You're just a gardener. What are you talking about? Did you go to a theological school or something? No. University? No. No, I just know him. So they find it hard to believe you when you're speaking the truth, because they're used to all these other scholarly experts. But children know the truth. Matthew 15:1-19, inner defilement. The scribes and Pharisees came to Jesus asking, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered, why do you transgress the commandment of your God for the sake of your tradition? For your God commanded, Honour your mother and father. And he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him surely die. But you say if anyone tells his father or mother that what they should have received from them is given to God, then they no longer have to honour their father or mother. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of your God. So what was happening is if they decided to give all their wealth to God, to the temple, to the Jewish leaders and the religion, they didn't have to worry about their mum and dad. They could starve to death in poverty. You hypocrites, well did as I predict, saying, this people honours me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the laws of men. You prefer the laws of men, such as washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such unimportant things, instead of the laws of your God. Jesus said to the crowd, hear and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of it, this defiles a man. Then the disciples came to Jesus and said, the Pharisees were offended by what you just said. Jesus said, every plant which our loving spiritual Creator has not planted will be unable to survive without her loving spiritual life force. Leave them to themselves. They are blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Peter then asked Jesus to explain the parable to them. Jesus said, are you still without understanding? Don't you get it yet, what I'm telling you? He must have been so frustrated at times. Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes out into the stomach, and then it is eliminated? But those things that proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, pride, foolishness, false witness, and blasphemies. These are the things that defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Again, you see the flesh versus the spirit, the flesh body, spirit body, flesh body, spirit body. Jesus says the only one that lives on is the spiritual body. Keep that clean. Author, Jesus reminds us again that our inner spiritual body and soul, mind of love are the most important part of our life to keep clean. Our physical bodies are literally made of the earth and dirt anyway, and return to it at death. Got a bit of dirt on my fingers. What are your fingers made of? Oh, dirt. Water, gases, biological elements, chemicals, minerals, copper, bone, calcium. It's all earth, it's all material. It's not your spiritual body. Leaven of the Pharisees, Matthew 16:5-12. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread when they set off in the boat with Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, be careful about the leaven of the Pharisees, Sadducees and Herod. They thought Jesus was talking about not bringing bread. But Jesus was aware of what they were saying and said, oh, you of little faith, why do you think what I just said was about you not bringing bread? Do you not understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it then that you do not understand? I was not talking about bread. I was talking about the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees and Herod. Then they understood he was talking about the teachings of them, not about bread. They were a bit slow on the uptake, the disciples at times. Author, the Jews were teaching that their two-headed God Yahweh was the only true God. Jesus warns the disciples not to listen to or believe them, as he was teaching them about the one true loving spiritual Creator and the correct way of love that leads us all to the heavenly spiritual world. It's that simple. Peter calls Jesus the Anointed One, Matthew 16:13-20. When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I am? And they told him, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the old prophets. Jesus asked, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered, saying, you are the Anointed One, a child of the living Creator. Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my loving spiritual Creator, who is in the heavenly spiritual world, has. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the heavenly kingdom, and whoever is bound against the earth will be bound from entering heaven, and whoever is loosed from the earth will be loosed into heaven. And he told them not to tell anyone that he was the anointed child of our loving Creator. Thomas, saying 12, the disciples said to Jesus, "We know you will leave us. Who's going to be our leader then?" Jesus said to them, "No matter where you reside, you are to go to James the just. For the care of heaven and earth, he came into being." So in the Thomas Gospel, he actually appointed James, his brother James, possibly James the Just, I think it is, his brother, but certainly James the Just. He appointed him to be the one in charge. So quite a different answer. Thomas 43, his disciples asked him, "Who are you to teach us all these things?" Jesus replied, "Don't you know who I am from what I've been saying to you? You have become like the Jews. Either they love the tree but hate its fruit, or they love the fruit but hate the tree." Thomas 13. Jesus said to his disciples, "Compare me with someone and tell me who I am like." Simon Peter said, "You are like a just angel." Matthew said, "You are like a wise philosopher." Thomas said, "Teacher, my mouth is utterly unable to say whom you are like." "You're like no one I've ever met before," Thomas is saying. Jesus then said to Thomas, "I am no longer your teacher, for you have become intoxicated after drinking from the bubbling spiritual spring that I have tended." And he took Thomas and withdrew and told him 3 things. When Thomas joined the others again, they asked him, "What did Jesus tell you?" Thomas said to them, "If I tell you even one of the things he told me, you will pick up rocks and stone me. Then fire will come forth from the rocks and devour you." Author. The keys to the kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world that Jesus gave to Peter and the other disciples are his words and his teachings of the spiritual way of love and non-violence that opens the way for all children to follow to heaven. That's what the keys are, the understanding of his words. They're the keys that unlock the prison you're in of ignorance. Do you get it? In Thomas, we see Jesus picking James to be their leader, not Peter. And Thomas receives special spiritual truths that the other disciples are not yet ready to hear or understand. For example, Jesus may have openly told Thomas that Yahweh was not the real God, but a hybrid between Satan and a loving God. This sort of truth would be regarded as blasphemy by Jews, and they would stone you to death for speaking this. So it's possible that, Thomas, he realized Thomas was really getting now the idea that Jesus was spiritual now, from another dimension, like his spiritual body's from another dimension, and it had come alive in him. Thomas was starting to get that. Also in Thomas we see different answers about who the disciples believe he might be, and the disciples questioning him about who he was. This may have been at an earlier time when the disciples were just beginning to follow Jesus. So we do have that account there in Thomas where they say, who are you to teach us these things? It's like when he was at Nazareth. Who are you to teach us these things? Who are you? You're just the carpenter's son. And we see it here, echoed here. But that could have been a very early stage of their following him. Like he's telling them all these things, and he's going, who are you? They go, who are you to teach us these things? You're not a rabbi. So that may have been absolutely accurate, but at an earlier stage when the disciples were just getting bombarded with all these new spiritual truths, So it's a beautiful thing. And the keys to the kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world that he gives to Peter and the others are his words, because without them it's going to be hard to awaken. Jesus predicts his death. Matthew 16:21-23. Jesus began explaining to the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and rise again from the dead. Then Peter took him aside and said, "Far be it from you, Master, that this should happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not thinking about the spiritual things of our loving spiritual Creator, but of the things of man." Author. Peter had no idea about the deeper spiritual teachings of Jesus and still did not realize We all have two different bodies in one, as Jesus was teaching. Jesus needed to die to the flesh in order to reveal to them his living spiritual body after it leaves his body of flesh at the time of death. Peter could only think of his body of flesh dying. See, that they still hadn't cottoned on to this understanding that we all have a spiritual body as well. So Peter was understanding, going, oh no, we don't want you to die. We don't want them to kill your body of flesh, not realizing that Jesus had to sort of do it as part of his teachings. An incredible self-sacrifice, of course. Take up your cross. Matthew 16:24-28. Jesus said to the disciples and the crowd, if anyone desires to come after me, let them become selfless, die to the flesh, and take up their cross and follow me in spirit. For whoever desires to just save their physical life will lose it. But whoever gives their physical life over for their spiritual life, by following my way and teachings, will find their true eternal spiritual life. For what profit is it to a person if they gain the whole temporary material world, but lose their own eternal spiritual spirit and soul? For what material thing can anyone exchange for their spirit and soul? I say to you, there are some standing here who will not die before they see the spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator going into her heavenly spiritual kingdom. Jesus said, be wanderers. Now, an interesting point here, in all the Gospels of the world that I know of, they've incorrectly translated this. And again, it's Matthew. I think it's pretty much Matthew. He's the apocalyptic Jew who's trying to paint Jesus the wrong way, distorting him. In those Gospels it says, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not die before they see the spiritual child of our loving Creator coming in the heavenly clouds or something like that. The Greek word going and coming, it actually means either. The same interlinear Greek word can mean going or coming. He's saying here, some of you are going to die. Before some of you die, they're going to kill me. They're going to murder me. Before some of you standing here, you won't be dead before that you see them kill me, and I'll be going to heaven. That's the correct saying, and it's in my gospel because that is the correct translation. It makes no sense if he says, oh, some of you standing here will not die before you see me coming from heaven. Well, they all died, and for 2,000 years everyone's died, and he still hasn't come back. That's because they've interfered with the translations, you see, particularly Matthew. He didn't say, I'm coming. He said, I'm going. And he said, follow me to where I've gone. I'm not coming back. Get a taxi. Come here yourself. Author. Again, we see Jesus saying it is vital that we bring our spiritual bodies and souls to life as he did by following his way and teachings and not be overly attached to this material temporary world. Flesh is not spirit. Spirit is not flesh. For a while they are at one in purpose, while here, to bring heaven's love to earth and all children. In the short Thomas saying, Jesus directs us to remember that we are just wandering through this world, not staying here. So set course for heaven as you wander along through the experiences of your life on earth. So it's a really sort of simple thing here. Take up your cross and follow me. Move into your spiritual body that's going to leave when you die. And the cross you're carrying really is your physical body that's going to die. The death on the cross is the death of the physical body. Well, my body's going to die. Yours is, everyone's does. But it's the spiritual body that lives on. So you take up your physical life with your spiritual life as your primary life. And you carry your physical body with you until you leave. Like the woman who put down the jar of flour that was empty at the end of her journey. Her physical body it ran out of all its life force and it was empty. So it's the same message he says all the way through. And be wanderers. We're not staying here. Heaven's there. Get to heaven, he's saying. At least aim for heaven. Get on the path to heaven. Don't go down that dark road there and join the bloody armies. That's darkness and Satan down there. Spiritual circumcision. Now you only find this in the Thomas Gospel 55. So this is a particular question about Jewish circumcision. The disciples then asked Jesus, is circumcision useful or not? Jesus answered them, "If it were useful, then a father would produce children already circumcised from their mother. Rather, the true spiritual circumcision is useful in every respect. The physical circumcision, useless. But spiritual circumcision, that's different," says Jesus. Author. Jesus is not concerned about the body of flesh too much, as it is only temporary. The Jews thought that if they circumcised an infant, that would somehow make them a child of Yahweh. Jesus says it is useless. But becoming an awakened spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator, filled with her loving life force, is the true way to become a child of our loving Creator. See, the circumcision was supposed to connect you to Yahweh, the two-headed God of the Jews. Jesus is saying, by becoming an awakened spiritual child, that's the real circumcision. That's the real connection. The circumcision ceremony is to connect you to God, right? If you awaken your spiritual body, you're connected to the heavenly spiritual world and our loving spiritual Creator. Correct? That's the circumcision he's talking about. That's the connection. You're a child of that loving spiritual Creator when your spiritual body of love and non-violence, and you're living out of it. It comes alive and you live out of it. And you will not join armies and navies and air forces and bomb and kill other children. You will stand against it. You'll be a pacifist Christian and nothing else, to death, because you pass through death to life. If you're spiritually awakened and filled with the loving life force. But it's not easy. He didn't say it was going to be easy. He said you're going to be hated, persecuted. Transfiguration, spiritual body. Matthew 17, 1-9. Jesus took Peter, James and John, his brother, up onto a high mountain by themselves. And as he was praying, the visible form of his appearance was different, and his clothing became like radiant light. And Peter and the disciples, seeing this, were frightened. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved spiritual child, listen to him." When the disciples heard this voice, they fell to the ground in fear. And when they raised their eyes to look, they saw no one but Jesus there. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them to tell no one what they had seen until the spiritual child of humanity is raised from the dead. So they kept what they saw to themselves and wondered what the rising from the dead meant. Author. Here we see the awakened spiritual body of Jesus still within his body of flesh that he was teaching about on display before the disciples. He literally put his whole sort of being into the spiritual mind and body, which started really glowing, because spiritual children are spiritual children of light. And they saw his spiritual body become so radiant that it dominated his physical identity. Even the clothes were so filled with the light from his spiritual body. He was simply concentrating his presence in his spiritual body, not his body of flesh. And it became so empowered at being at one with that, while in his flesh, that it glowed through his flesh, you might say. The water in the vase became like a really bright light, and it shone through the vase. The vase started to glow. That's what happened. That's actually what happened. So here we see the awakened spiritual body of Jesus still within his body of flesh that he was teaching about on display before the disciples. This is the body of light and spirit that Jesus said we all have within us, like a treasure in a field of flesh, to find, bring alive and live out of. He only chose a few close disciples to see his spiritual body glowing, as the others were less prepared. But even they were frightened by seeing the radiance of his spiritual body and confused by it. They didn't understand what was happening to him. Later, after he rose in his spiritual body from his dead body of flesh and appeared to them in his spiritual body only, these three disciples would then understand he already had his spiritual body while still in his body of flesh, just as we all do. But not everyone has found their living spiritual body, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving spiritual Creator. And sadly, some children even become evil shadow figures formed out of their own imaginations and egos. See, so once they saw him in his spiritual body after his body of flesh died on the cross and he left that body behind, they would remember, because when they saw him in the spiritual body, they thought he was a ghost. You know, it was like glowing. It looked a bit like him, sort of thing, looked like him. We weren't certain, but is that you, Jesus? So his spiritual body was obviously, radiant up on the mountain there, and they would have seen the same radiance in his spiritual body when he appeared to them after he left his body of flesh. Then they would have, the light would have gone on in their heads. They would have gone, that's what he meant. We've all got this spiritual body in it. We saw it on the hill. We remember that time on the hill? That's what we saw. We just saw him now. He just appeared to us. He appears to them briefly after he's killed, his physical body's killed, in his perfect spiritual body. Then those three can go, right. He was displaying it to us then. He already had it. It was already alive. And now he's left in it and gone to the heavenly spiritual world in his spiritual body. See, so they would know that this is very important. He did that for them. Because these three then knew absolutely, we've all got it within us now. Because he showed it to them by simply making it glow. He also showed it to them on the water when he was walking on the water. But this was a very specific, just the three of them saw it. And then when he appeared to them after his body of flesh died, they go, this is the same body we saw up on that hill, that glowing body. See, so that's what it's all about. This makes sense, it's logical, it's intelligent, but it's still completely spiritual. So I can't prove this to any scientific materialist non-believer. I've got no material proof. But I understand how this could happen. I understand that this did happen. I believe this happened. And I believe that's what we're all here for, to wake up to our spiritual body before our body of flesh dies, and at the same time try to bring a bit of love and peace into the world from heaven. Try. No point becoming a beast of the flesh and joining the satanic warmongers. That's just pure filthy evil. So, that's a beautiful dialogue. Love it. Jesus again predicts his fate. Matthew 17:22-23. Jesus again tells the disciples of his coming fate, saying, the spiritual child of humanity will be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, he will rise again. But the disciples had no idea about what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about what he was saying. Author, the disciples still did not understand. We all have two different bodies with us right now. As Jesus taught, one dies and is food to the vultures, which is our body of flesh, and one is spiritual, raised up from the dead flesh to be taken to be near to our loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world if we are ready. See, the disciples, he kept telling them, but they weren't ready for this. The Jews weren't ready for this truth at all, and the disciples were having a tough time getting a handle on it, But he tells them again there, but the disciples had no idea about what he meant. It wasn't until he appeared to them in his spiritual body after the Jews killed his body of flesh, which died, and the disciples had to hide it. But the thing was, once he appeared in his spiritual body, then all these sayings started to make sense to them. The Jews weren't ready for it, so they had to cover up some of the truth by saying, his dead body of flesh came back to life. That didn't happen. The Jews did have a history of some of their really great prophets, two or three of them or something, they were walking along, one of them Elijah, one of them, and a chariot from heaven came down, and while they were walking, they were taken up to heaven in their physical body. That's part of their old belief system. And so the Jews knew they could sell that to the Jews. They could sell that one. But that's a puff, that's a red herring. They did that because if they'd have said he only had a spiritual body, we saw him, but he only had a spiritual body, and his dead body of flesh is in the tomb rotting away. But we saw him and he spoke to us and he's alive and well. Then the Jews just wouldn't have believed that. They would have said, you're all lying. If his dead body's there, we'll go look at it. He's dead. He's dead. He can't be. You couldn't have seen him. See, so that the whole spiritual way of Jesus could have been destroyed if they didn't hide his dead body of flesh. They couldn't say, they had to say they saw him alive and well, which he was. He was in a spiritual body, which was perfect. But then they had to put in these red herrings. He had wounds in his hands, and he ate some fish and honey. Is there any toilet paper there for him? I mean, it's absurd. Jesus said you'll have a body like an angel. But in those days it worked. It doesn't work now, because you can see his words clearly. You don't marry or get married in heaven. There's no biological stuff happening. You have bodies like angels. Angels are spiritual beings. You'll be a spiritual being. You've got a spiritual body with you now. It's going to leave at death. Get into it. Wake up. bring those dead to the spirit back to life. When the body's dead, feed it to the vultures. It's all in his words. It's very clear, but it's been poisoned by the Jewish religion and the overlays and the apocalyptics. The apocalyptic stuff has done massive damage. It's a Jewish trick or con job that some apocalyptic Jew did deliberately to distort and destroy and pervert who the loving Creator is and who Jesus is. This is a deliberate attack by a Jew thousands of years ago on the Christian religion to distort and pervert who Jesus and the loving Creator really are. They're only love. So, yeah, so that's something that as a Christian, because I'm not a Jewish Christian, it's easy for me to see it, you know, stands out quite like a sore thumb, you might say. And but Jewish Christians don't get it because they're brainwashed. They worship Yahweh still, the old two-headed God of the Jews. I don't worship Yahweh. Sorry. You can have that war God. And there's a God of Yahweh love there too. Yeah, okay, well, have that one, but get rid of the rest, you know. Or you may as well have the Quran in the Christian church, or the Bhagavad Gita, or Buddhist teachings. Why not read from them? You know, why are you reading from about a God who goes and tells all the Jews to go down and slaughter everyone at Jericho and steal everything? Why have you got that in the Christian church of Jesus, the child of love, the Prince of Peace, of the God of love and peace? Why have you got that in there? You're better off having Buddhist teachings in the Christian churches. At least they're paralleled right up to a very large degree. As always, we'll move on. I love talking about his words, so I'm sorry if it's boring, but I just love talking about him. And I've got a lot of head pain, this sort of meningitis type pain from the neurotoxins poisoning the brain all the time. And so the head's in massive pain. But whenever I'm talking about his words, I'm sort of almost on not another level, but I'm in my spiritual body, of course. My spiritual mind's dominating, but my head and brain, my horse's brain is hurting quite a lot. And sometimes I forget things, but amazingly I can be still reasonably articulate enough, I think, to convey this logic and this intelligence. It's in his words, and all I've done is translate them more correctly. That's all. But if you know his love and non-violence, you don't need to go to universities to do theological studies in Greek. His love and non-violence. And you're reading, he's coming back on the clouds now to cause sickness on children, start wars, and starve people to death. Is that Jesus? No, rip it out. If you don't know Jesus, it stays in. And all the Jewish Christians keep it in because they don't know Jesus. They sort of know him, or charities, yeah. But he's going to come back and destroy all the bad people. He's no longer the shepherd of the lost sheep. He's now the destroyer of the lost sheep. I mean, it's just absurd. It's insanity. It's demented behaviour. It's demented thinking. It's schizophrenic. It's Jewish Christians, you see. Hybrid. They're hybrids. I'm just a Christian. Sorry. Don't be sorry about that. Okay. Love your way to heaven. Or, of course, if you want to hate your way to hell, go and join the Israeli army or the Russian army, Hamas or Iran or Ukraine. Go and kill children and you'll go to hell. No worries, your free will. I strongly advise you not to do that. I pray for all these satanic children who are going to hell, unless they change. Don't support those armies with money or anything at all. But what can you do? America, satanic America, giving them armaments, other countries giving bombs and guns to kill more children. No point. Everyone's body of flesh dies anyway. Love is love. Bye.